Get him out of here. Now. The voice was sharp, a blade of youthful arrogance cutting through the thick, humid air of the parade ground. Lieutenant Evans, his uniform so crisp it looked like it could draw blood, jabbed a gloved finger towards the old man. This is a secure military event, not a soup kitchen. Remove him. Two young military police officers, barely out of their teens, moved hesitantly towards the figure lingering near the bleachers. The man was old, his back stooped inside a faded army field jacket that had seen better decades. His face was a roadmap of hardship, his beard untrimmed and gray, but his eyes, clear and steady, missed nothing. He hadn't said a word, had only been watching the demonstration with a quiet intensity that Evans found irritatingly out of place among the cheering families and starched dignitaries. The old man simply held up his hands, a gesture of peaceful compliance, and allowed himself to be guided away from the crowd, his worn boots scuffing softly on the asphalt. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was just looking for a memory, a ghost of the man he used to be, in the scent of polished brass and diesel fumes. Inside the cordoned-off VIP tent, the demonstration's guest of honor, a slick junior senator, was laughing heartily at a joke from General Marcus Thorne. Thorne, a man whose presence filled the tent more than his physical size, commanded respect with a glance. His chest was a billboard of military achievement, a lifetime of service displayed in neat, colorful rows. The demonstration was a showcase of the Army's new Rapid Response Medical Unit, a project Thorne had personally championed. State-of-the-art, Senator, Thorne was saying, his voice a low rumble of pride. Our medics can set up a fully functional trauma bay in under 10 minutes. The training is second to none. As if on cue, a simulated explosion echoed across the field, and the new medical unit swarmed a set of realistic dummies, their movements a blur of practiced efficiency. The senator applauded politely. The real test, however, was about to begin, and it wasn't part of the script. It started with a cough. A young aide to the senator, trying to discreetly swallow a canopy, suddenly gasped. His face, moments before flushed with excitement, began to turn a worrying shade of red. He clutched at his throat, his eyes wide with panic. At first, it was dismissed as a simple case of something going down the wrong pipe. A staffer slapped him on the back. The aide's choking only intensified. His gasps became silent, desperate convulsions. Panic, a contagion far more virulent than any battlefield pathogen, began to spread through the tent. Medic, someone shouted, the word cutting through the polite chatter. Two of the demonstration medics, young men with confident smiles and immaculate gear, rushed into the tent. This was their moment to shine in front of the general. They immediately began the Heimlich maneuver, their movements precise, exactly as the manual dictated. 1 thrust, 2, 3, nothing. The aide's face was darkening, a terrifying bloom of purple spreading across his skin. Another medic team took over, their faces tight with concentration. 4 attempts. 5, 6. The man's body went limp, his knees buckling. They lowered him to the ground, the senator now pale and shouting encouragement. General Thorne's face had become a granite mask. What's the problem, Sergeant? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The medic, sweat beading on his brow, shook his head. Sir, the obstruction is completely blocking the airway. Standard procedure isn't working. 10 attempts. 12. 15 failed attempts. The young man on the floor was no longer moving. A terrible, suffocating silence fell over the tent, broken only by the frantic beeping of a heart monitor they'd attached, its rhythm becoming terrifyingly slow. Thorne looked at the dying man, then at his state-of-the-art medics, their faces masks of failure and disbelief. His entire career was built on readiness, on competence, on saving lives. And right here, in front of everyone, his best and brightest were failing. The carefully constructed image of military perfection was shattering. A cold fury, born of desperation, rose in his chest. He stormed to the edge of the tent, his eyes scanning the stunned crowd beyond. His voice, a sound honed by decades of command, boomed across the entire parade ground, silencing every conversation, turning every head. Is there a medic here? I said, is there a real medic here? I don't care who you are or what you look like. If you can save this man, get in this tent now. From the edge of the assembly area, where he was being quietly detained by the 2 MPs, The old man heard the general's desperate plea. It was a sound he recognized, the call of a commander on the verge of losing a soldier. The sound that had echoed in his nightmares for 50 years. He looked at the two young men holding his arms. They were frozen, looking towards the tent, their orders momentarily forgotten. In that instant, the stooped, tired vagrant vanished. The man who stood in his place was straight, his eyes narrowed with a focus that was chilling in its intensity. He moved with a sudden, surprising economy of motion, shrugging off the MP's loose grip as if they were children. "Let me go, son," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, but carrying an authority that made the young soldiers instinctively step back. He started walking towards the tent, not running, but with a long, determined stride that ate up the ground. Lieutenant Evans saw him coming, and his face contorted with rage. "I told you to get that filth out of here," he snarled, moving to intercept the old man. "This is a restricted area. You are in violation of a direct order." The old man didn't even break his stride. "There's a man dying," he said, his voice calm, his eyes fixed on the tent. Evans put a hand on the man's chest, shoving him back. "That is none of your concern, old-timer. My medics will handle it. Now get out before I have you arrested for assaulting an officer." For the first time, the old man's eyes met Evans. The lieutenant felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. There was no fear in those eyes, no deference. There was only a vast, cold calm, like the surface of a deep, frozen lake. "Your medics are failing because they are treating the symptom, not the cause," the old man said, his voice flat. "They are following a book that doesn't account for a laryngeal spasm caused by an allergic reaction. He's not just choking, his throat is closing. You have about 30 seconds left." Evans was momentarily stunned by the specificity of the diagnosis, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "And what would you know about it? You get your medical degree from a dumpster?" He shoved the old man again, harder this time. "I'm giving you one last warning," but the shove was like pushing against an ancient oak tree. The old man didn't move. Instead, he simply sidestepped the furious lieutenant, his movements fluid and unexpectedly swift. He was inside the tent before Evans could react. The scene was one of controlled chaos. The aide was now fully cyanotic, his lips blue. A medic was preparing a desperate, last-ditch intubation attempt, fumbling with the equipment. The old man ignored the protests and the hands that tried to grab him. He knelt beside the dying aide, his gnarled fingers gently probing the man's neck. "Get your hands off him," the medic shouted. The old man paid him no mind. His touch was clinical, assessing. "Get me a pen," he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority that momentarily silenced the room. "And a bottle of whiskey." A stunned silence followed. General Thorne, who had watched the entire exchange with a mixture of fury and intrigue, barked, "Do it. Now." Someone thrust a ballpoint pen into the old man's hand, and another produced a flask of expensive single-malt scotch. The old man didn't hesitate. He pulled the ink cartridge from the pen, creating a hollow plastic tube. He unscrewed the flask, poured a liberal amount of the whiskey over the pen barrel and his own fingers, the strong alcoholic scent filling the air. Then, with the calm precision of a master craftsman, he tilted the aide's head back, felt for the cricothyroid membrane in the man's throat with one finger, and with his other hand, he drove the sharp end of the pen casing directly into the soft tissue. There was a sickening, soft crunch, and then a faint hiss. He put his mouth to the open end of the pen and blew gently. The aide's chest rose. He blew again. The chest rose higher. A faint, wheezing sound came from the man's throat. Air was getting in. The terrifying blue color began to recede from the man's lips, replaced by a pale, life-giving pink. Within a minute, the aide was coughing, his eyes fluttering open. The old man sat back on his heels, a quiet thump as he settled. He looked at the now-breathing young man, then wiped his hands on his worn trousers. The tent was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the steady, normalizing beep of the heart monitor. General Thorne stared, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He had seen countless field-expedient procedures in his life, but none performed with such calm, brutal efficiency. This was not the work of a bystander with a first aid course. This was the work of a master. He walked over to the old man, who was now being helped to his feet by a stunned medic. "What's your name?" Thorne asked, his voice softer now, laced with awe. The old man looked at him, his eyes weary again. Silas, he said simply. Silas Kane. Thorne's brow furrowed. The name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. He looked closer at the man, at the weathered face, the faded jacket. And then he saw it. On the man's right forearm, peeking out from under a frayed cuff, was a tattoo. It was old, the ink blurred and faded, but the image was unmistakable. A coiled serpent wrapped around a winged dagger, with the words "De oppresso liber" underneath. Special Forces. But there was something else below it, a smaller, even more faded tattoo. A ghostly specter holding a caduceus. Thorne felt a chill run down his spine. It was a unit marking he hadn't seen in 50 years. A phantom unit from the deepest, darkest corners of the Vietnam War. What was your unit, Silas? Thorne asked, his voice barely a whisper. The old man hesitated, then sighed, a sound of deep resignation. 5th Special Forces Group, Project Delta. B. 52-inch Lieutenant Evans, who had finally entered the tent, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, scoffed. Project Delta has been defunct for decades. He's a liar, sir. He's probably just some stolen valor case trying to. Quiet, Lieutenant. Thorne snapped, his eyes never leaving Silas's face. He turned to his aide-de-camp, a young major. Give me everything you can on a Silas Kane, 5th Special Forces, Vietnam era. Now the major, wide-eyed, scrambled away with his tablet. Thorne turned back to Silas. Thank you, he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. You just saved that man's life. Silas merely nodded, looking uncomfortable with the attention. He seemed to shrink back into himself, the stooped, anonymous old man returning. The major returned a few minutes later, his face completely drained of color. He walked stiffly, as if in a trance, and held the tablet out to General Thorne with a trembling hand. Sir, he whispered. You need to see this. Thorne took the tablet. On the screen was a grainy, black-and-white photo from 1969. It showed a young man, lean and hard, with the same steady eyes as the old man standing before him. His uniform was crisp, his chest adorned with a small collection of ribbons. But it was the text below the photo that made Thorne's breath catch in his throat. Kane, Silas J., Command Sergeant Major. U.S. Army Special Forces. And then the list of citations began. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device and 4 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart with 7 oak leaf clusters. And at the very top of the list, a decoration that made the air in the tent feel thin and sacred, Medal of Honor. The citation described an action during a long-range reconnaissance patrol deep in enemy territory. His team had been ambushed, outnumbered 10-1. Kane, the team's senior medic, had been wounded multiple times but single-handedly held off the enemy assault for 6 hours, all while tending to the wounds of his 5 comrades. He dragged 2 men to the extraction point, carrying one on his back, while providing covering fire. He was the last man on the helicopter. The file continued. After his heroic actions, CSM Kane became a legend in the Special Operations medical community. They called him the Ghost, because he could get to wounded men no one else could reach. He pioneered new techniques in combat trauma care, wrote half the manuals the current generation of medics studied, and trained the first generation of Delta Force operators in field medicine. Then, in 1975, his file just ended, listed as honorably discharged, no forwarding address. No further contact. He had simply vanished. The ghost had lived up to his name. General Thorne slowly lowered the tablet, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at the quiet, disheveled old man before him, and for the first time in his 30-year career, he felt utterly humbled. He was standing in the presence of living history, of a bona fide American hero who had been moments away from being thrown off his base like a piece of trash. He turned his gaze to Lieutenant Evans, and the temperature in the tent dropped 20 degrees. Lieutenant, Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet, a storm gathering on the horizon. Evans snapped to attention, his face pale with dawning horror. Sir, do you have any idea who you were speaking to? Thorne asked, his voice a low, menacing growl. Evans swallowed hard. Sir, I was just maintaining security protocols. You were maintaining your ego, Lieutenant. Thorne cut him off, his voice rising with each word. You were so blinded by your own spit-shined reflection that you failed to see the man standing in front of you. You saw a bum. You saw a problem to be removed. You did not see a warrior. You did not see a hero. You did not see a man who has bled more for the flag on your shoulder than you have sweat for it. Thorne stepped closer, his face inches from the terrified lieutenants. This man, this filth you so eagerly wanted to discard, is Command Sergeant Major Silas Kane. He holds the Medal of Honor. The procedures your medics were fumbling through, he wrote them. The advanced techniques they haven't even learned yet, he invented them on a battlefield while people were actively trying to kill him. You did not just disrespect an old man, Lieutenant. You dishonored a legend. You dishonored this uniform. And you dishonored yourself. The silence in the tent was absolute. Every soldier, every staffer, stood frozen, witnessing the public evisceration of a promising young officer. Evans's face had crumbled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, gut-wrenching shame. His eyes welled with tears, which he fought desperately to hold back. He looked at Silas, at the quiet old man who had endured his scorn without a word, and he felt a wave of self-loathing so powerful it almost buckled his knees. General Thorne took a deep breath, composing himself. He turned back to Silas, his entire demeanor changing from fury to profound respect. He executed the sharpest, most reverent salute of his life. "Command Sergeant Major Kane," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "On behalf of the United States Army, I apologize. Profoundly. There is no excuse for the way you were treated. None. Every other soldier in the tent, from the highest-ranking major to the lowest-ranking private, followed the general's lead, their hands snapping to their foreheads in a wave of salutes." Silas looked around at the sea of saluting soldiers, a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes. He gave a slight, almost hesitant nod, the gesture of a man long unaccustomed to such recognition. "It's all right, General," he said, his voice soft. "People see what they expect to see." Thorne lowered his hand. "No, Sergeant Major, it is not all right. We failed you. The system failed you. After everything you did, you should have been cared for, honored. Not this." He gestured vaguely at Silas's worn clothes. "What can we do? Anything. Your full back pay and pension, restored immediately. A house. A car. A position here, at this base, as a senior instructor. You name it. It's yours." Silas was quiet for a long moment, looking past the general, at the young medics who were now packing their gear, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. "I don't need a house, General," he said finally. "Had one. Lost it. Don't need a car. I walk." He paused, his gaze drifting to the flagpole in the center of the parade ground, the stars and stripes snapping smartly in the breeze. There's a wall. In D.C. Got a lot of friends on that wall. Haven't been back to see them in a long time. Too hard to get there." He looked at Lieutenant Evans, who was still standing rigidly, tears now openly streaming down his face. "I'll tell you what I'll take, General," Silas said. "I'll take him." He nodded towards Evans. "I want him to drive me to Washington. I want him to stand there with me while I say hello to my boys. And I want him to learn that the names on that wall, and the men who came home, aren't just history. They're people." General Thorne looked from the legendary hero to the broken young officer. He saw not a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance for education, for redemption, for a bridge to be built between two generations of soldiers. "Your request is granted, Sergeant Major," Thorne said formally. He turned to Evans. "Lieutenant, you have your orders. You will personally escort Command Sergeant Major Kane to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. You will provide for his every need. You will listen to every word he has to say, and you will not return to this base until he tells you that your duty is complete. Is that understood?" Evans, his voice choked with emotion, could barely manage the words. "Yes, General." "Crystal clear, sir." He took a hesitant step towards Silas and, for the first time, looked him in the eye not with scorn, but with a shattering, desperate plea for forgiveness. "Sergeant Major," he began, his voice cracking. Silas held up a hand, stopping him. "Save it for the drive, son," he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips for the first time. "It's a long road.